All right, so in this one, we're going to be coming back to a bit of back extension, but we're also kind of doing some hip extension and strengthening for hip extension. This is more of a supported version, but we're going to do a supported bridge. No. Okay, I'm going to redo that intro. All right, we are going to start introducing bridge type positions. This is going to reintroduce some spinal extension again, but it's also going to get us doing some hip extension and in particular strengthening into hip extension. So we're going to have a block, okay? We want something firm that we can use to elevate our hips off the floor and support it there because we're going to do a restorative bridge as well as an active bridge. We're going to start off on our backs on the floor. Feet are hip width apart. And we are going to lift, we're going to use the quads and we're going to use the glutes to lift the hips off the floor and slide a block underneath your pelvis. Okay? Now, the nice thing with yoga blocks is there's different settings. I highly recommend starting on the first one. So the largest surface area side is on the floor, and that is what your bum is resting on. That's going to ask for the least amount of back extension and hip extension. You could also go up to the second level where you go on the longer edge of the block. So the longer edge of the block is on the floor and the other side of it, the longer edge of the block, is what your bum is resting on. But you're just going to have to determine how much extension feels comfortable for you. And just don't force something for the sake of forcing something, okay? But we can just hang out here. This is a lovely restorative position to just hang out in. Once you have the block in place, it's no longer an active back and hip extension. We'll do that next. So when you're ready, you can just lift your bum a little bit so that you're able to remove that block and slowly, one vertebrae at a time, lower your back down. Now, for more of an active bridge, because it can become a little more fatiguing, I would recommend taking the block that you just had under your hips and now placing it between your thighs. You don't need to squeeze the bejeebus out of that block, but it is going to encourage you to not just let your knees splay open accidentally so that the block can fall. We want to keep the block there. So it's going to ask for some engagement of the inner thighs. Your forearms can be on the floor. They can offer you a little bit of support, but we want most of the work to be coming from our hip extenders, which is our butt muscles, okay? So we're going to extend the hips up into the air. And the goal is to kind of get flat. So at the beginning, you might be a little lower, where there's a bit more of a angle here at the hips. But the goal is to eventually get enough height, feel those butt muscles working, that your belly to along your thighs is kind of just a straight shot. And then you can slowly let that come back down. So bridges, I often give people the option of experimenting with what they prefer. If they want to go up and down and up and down to their breath and do repetitions, versus if they want to go up and hold it for a certain length of time, making sure that they are breathing while they do that, and then coming out of it and doing fewer repetitions of longer holds. Okay, these exercises are very subtle. They're a little bit pelvic floor-y, they're a little bit core-y, not the name, core-y, and they're a little bit breath-y. So when I learned it, I was taught it's called candles or 100 candles. And the idea is that we are gonna do this seated first. We're gonna sit down comfortably and we are going to do an exhale. Now, a few things about this exhale. It is going to be slow and controlled. It is going to be through pursed lips. The reason it's called candles is because you're imagining, the reason why it's called 100 candles is you're imagining you've got this birthday cake in front of you with all these candles over top of it. And you're going to take one breath, and your goal is to get as many of those candles blown out with that one breath as possible. So you inhale and that slow exhale where you're really being careful about how much breath leaves at one time, but there's enough force coming out that it might actually blow out a candle. When you do this again, you are going to pay attention to the lower abdomen area. And I just want you to notice what happens as you do that controlled, even, strong enough to blow out a candle breath. Okay, so we're going to inhale. Hopefully what you noticed is that there was this broad, slow, consistent inward movement of that lower abdomen. It wasn't this big crunch. It wasn't everything crunching. It wasn't a big, forceful corset thing. It was just this nice, slow, gentle, soft, but still strong, inward kind of pressing of that lower abdomen, okay? So when we talk about engaging the core in any kind of exercise, that's kind of the core engagement I like people to aim for. It's not this great big bracing, it's not this great big breath holding, it's not creating a lot of tension. We don't want to make a whole bunch of pressure inside our abdominal cavity. It's just a very subtle, gentle thing. And the reality is your body can do it naturally. Our core is one of those muscle groups that it kind of does what it needs to do on its own. We don't really need to intentionally engage it a lot of the time. So this is where it's going to get tricky. We just did that in sitting, and that's probably the most comfortable and familiar because we tend to be upright, we tend to be sitting, and especially when we're blowing out a birthday cake, we tend to be sitting. We are now going to lie on our backs, and we are going to repeat that exercise, and we are going to try to find that same inward engagement as we do that breath on our backs. This will be a little bit easier in that your body's going to move with gravity naturally, but that might make it a little harder to detect. So we're going to give that a go. We're going to just lay on our backs. Your knees can be bent. Everything's supported by the floor. We're going to inhale. So you're welcome to do that again, and just notice how it differs. Notice how the sensation of that movement differs when gravity just kind of lets everything sink anyways, right? It's going to change the sensations compared to when you are upright and the body, the belly is moving kind of through space towards the spine, okay? Now, another position that we're going to try that in is on our hands and knees. And this is probably the trickiest one because gravity wants our belly to go down towards the floor. So we're going to get into this position, and just remember that you're not necessarily forcefully sucking it up, okay? We're going to get into a hands and knees position here. We're going to take a nice inhale. So in order to send that breath out through pursed lips slowly and controlled, you're going to feel the belly doing that thing. But because you're in this other orientation where everything wants to go down towards the floor, once again, it's going to change the sensation, the internal sensations that you feel and you pick up on when those core muscles do the exact same thing they've been doing with each version so far, right? The same thing can feel different depending on your orientation. The last way we're going to feel this is in standing. And I'm actually going to kneel because I don't want to have to adjust my camera screen just yet. So I'm going to be in kneeling. This is going to be more similar to the sitting one, except your hips are now neutral. You're holding your spine upright differently. So it might change things a bit again. So we're going to inhale and we're going to exhale. Okay, you can do that another time if you want to. All right. So you can see how a gentle core engagement, depending on what yoga posture you're doing, if you're on your back, if you're on your hands and knees, if you're sitting, if you're standing, it's going to feel different. But starting to recognize, okay, yes, my core is gently engaged, and being able to pick up on that regardless of the position you're in can be really great information to have. Now, this series is not about downward dog, and it's definitely not about three-legged dog. However, I wanted to take a moment just to talk about three-legged dog because it is really important for pigeon. Simply because it tends to be the most common transition in a flow, right? Coming from a downward dog, sending the leg up, stepping it forward, and coming into a pigeon. So I do want to talk about three-legged dog just enough to point out some similarities to things we've done before. Similar to when we were doing quadruped stuff, when you're in a downward dog, you really want to engage through those arms to create that space, through the arms, through the shoulders, through your spine. Also in a three-legged dog, similar to what we did in our quadruped with the leg extension and then lifting the leg, only the amount that doesn't cause a whole bunch of extra stuff, that is going to come into play with a three-legged dog. So, if we're in a downward dog, and then we're going to kick up into a three-legged dog so that we can bring the leg forward into pigeon, there's two ways you'll commonly see downward dog done. There's where you keep the leg in neutral. So we do the same thing we did in quadruped, lifting the leg, where we only lift the leg into the air within a height where we don't start to hyperextend the back or twist through the spine and the hips. Okay? That's why it's similar to what we did here. You will also see people come into a downward dog and really twist and open up to the side of the room. So if I do this from head on, so that you can see, downward dog, three-legged dog where I keep things neutral, three-legged dog where I go higher, but I start to get a lot of twisting happen. Okay? Another thing with downward dog and three-legged dog with how it pertains to stepping the leg through into pigeon is you really want to create as much space as you can under your body for that leg to move through. This is achieved a couple different ways. Again, coming back to the really pushing away from the ground with your arms. You can also do a little bit of arching through the back, kind of like in cat back. And you can also come up onto the ball of the foot that's still on the floor. So for example, if I'm in downward dog, I can come way up high on the ball of my foot. I can kind of arch my back, and I'm pushing away with my arms to have space to bring that leg through. If I stay low, it can be really easy to kind of hit the floor. Okay, so those are just a few quick pointers about downward dog and three-legged dog. And I am planning on making an even bigger series than this, specifically about downward dog and three-legged dog. But just for now, for the purposes of getting in and out of Pigeon, those are just a few pointers that you can work on, and hopefully that makes things feel a little more accessible to you.